Hi there and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Vera and on here I like to talk about anything that's going on in my knitting life. Today I thought I would go on a little adventure in the world of free patterns online, and I kind of want to share all my favorite free colorwork patterns that I've been coming across or that I found through searching online. Now there's a lot of beautiful free patterns out there that either designers create and they just decide to not charge for them, but there's also a lot of free patterns from knitwear websites or from yarn websites I should say, that sell their yarn, and through selling their patterns they try to get you to buy their yarn. So today I kind of wanted to focus on colorwork projects. Now I will preface this with saying that there are not by far as many colorwork patterns that are available for free than other patterns and non-colorwork patterns. My guess is that colorwork is just a little bit more time intensive to design and a little bit more complex, I guess. So I think it's totally fair that designers want to charge for them. And I think it's also something that needs to be said, is that I think supporting designers for creating patterns is such a lovely thing to be able to do. There's a lot of designers that are full-time pattern designers. There's some designers that are part-time that do it as their hobby, but I think whatever their stage of pattern designing is, I think paying for a pattern is one of the best ways to be able to support them. But I also understand that paying for knitting patterns is definitely expensive in the long run, and that not everyone is in the position to be able to just purchase them left, right, center. So with this video, I just wanted to share that there are free colorwork patterns out there. I think I'm going to share around 11 of them today. So let's get right into it. The first one is a pretty old pattern, and this pattern is definitely not kind of like the vibe of the rest of this video, so take this first one with a grain of salt, but I still wanted to include it because I think it's a really fun one. It is called Diana Black Sheep Sweater. The designers are Sally Muir and Joanna Osborne, and this was first released in 1984, which I think is very fun, very cool. So it is essentially this stockinette sweater that features these sheep on them. So cool. All the sheep are white except for one sheep, which is black, and I think it was like featured in one of the old now retro magazines. So the pattern now is available just as a PDF download, and it comes in sizes 6 through 14, whatever that might mean. I guess it's American sizing is what my guess is. The yarn weight that's used here is a fingering weight yarn, and the gauge is 18 stitches and 23 rows and 5 centimeters in stranded stockinette stitch with 3mm needles, which is interesting. I don't think I would get an 18 stitch gauge with fingering yarn on 3mm needles, but maybe they did. But I think this is such a fun sweater if you love sheep, or if you have someone in your life that loves sheep. I think this is a sweater to be making. It is definitely a fun one, and I don't know, I just love the herd of sheep that's going on the sweater, and it's a free pattern, so might as well try it out. I think with these free colorwork patterns, another thing that you can do is take the colorwork and integrate it into something else. So if you don't like a full-on sheep sweater, you can also just do a few sheeps on your sweater and keep the rest in a simple plain color if it's a bit too much for you, which I also totally understand. Okay, so now moving on to I kind of took a few websites that I know have free patterns, and I picked out my favorite free colorwork patterns that these websites have. The first one is Drops Design. So Drops is a very popular yarn brand. They make all types of yarns, and it's usually more on the affordable side, which is why a lot of knitters lean to Drops yarn. I myself, I'm a big fan of Drops yarn. I've used it in a number of different projects, some with more success than others, I will say. So Drops Design also has a huge, and I mean huge, I think they have over 10,000 patterns. At least that's what the search thing says for me. A huge database of free patterns. It is kind of like one of those situations where you have to browse through them a little bit in order to find something that matches your style and matches your skill level. But the Colourworks that I found that were my favorite were 3 different ones. The first one is the Maple Whisper Sweater. This one, the suggested yarns are Drops Lima or Drops Charisma, and they come in size, it comes in sizes XS through 3XL. So this is a top-down circular yoke sweater that then features this stranded color work, and yeah, it definitely is more of like a wintry type pullover. I have the Drops Lima in my stash, and it is kind of like your typical DK weight woolen yarn. Now, I have heard that with the Drops patterns, they might not be as beginner friendly as than the knitting patterns that we might be used to from some of the more popular designers. But I think if you are a little bit experienced in knitting, it's definitely something that you can kind of power through. So the first one was the Maple Whisper Sweater. The second one is called Far Away, and honestly this one reminds me so much of the porcelain sweater that's kind of going a little bit viral, or that has been going a little bit viral lately. This has a very similar like color scheme to the porcelain sweater. This one is it's knit up in Drops Baby Merino and Drops Kid Silk, and it essentially is this like a drop shoulder colorwork sweater that comes with, or that features colorwork in these like 3 sections. The colorwork is these beautiful stars, again a very Nordic design I find. But I think it's so beautiful. I think this might be like one of my favorite free patterns in terms of just the visuals. So this one comes in sizes S through 3XL, and you essentially hold 2 yarns together to create these beautiful like stripes with the stars. I actually knit a hat with a similar star pattern on it, and it was quite intuitive after a while. Once you kind of get to understand how the star is constructed, like it's really not that difficult. So I think this might also be like a nice colorwork pattern because of how symmetrical it is, to kind of start a little bit to venture deeper into colorwork. This one is also stranded colorwork, which in my opinion is a little bit more manageable than intarsia. So yeah, that's another beautiful Drops design pattern. The next Drops design pattern is another kind of like a fun one where I should have probably ordered this next to the first sweater. This one is called Sheep Happens, which is a funny name. This is essentially a circular yoke sweater that features this like sheep row, or this row of sheep like just standing in the middle of the sweater. I don't know how else to describe it. The way the sheep are aligned are so that they're all touching each other, which I think is adorable, and with the different color at the top and the bottom, it's really creating this like almost like this landscape like vibe of the sweater. So I think if you're making this and if you put like, I don't know, like an earthier tone at the bottom and like a blue or something at the top, it can really be like a sheep meadow sweater, which I think is super cute. It's also a sweater that I think in terms of color work is more manageable because you are working a lot of stock in it in just one color at the bottom. This one again comes in sizes S through 3XL, and the recommended yarn here is Drops Merino Extra Fine or Drops Lima. And I don't know, I just love the sheep. They're so cute how they're all standing there next to each other. I guess this one is a little bit more of like a fun colorwork pattern. The fun thing here as well is that they have like all type of different like versions of it. So there's like a cardigan, then there is like a kid's pullover, there's a kid's hat, there's a kid's cardigan. So if you don't like this as like an adult garment, it might also be worth it looking into this pattern to make for a child, because it is of course a little bit more of like a youthful, playful design. Now moving away from Drops design and onto the Hobbii website, which also features a number of free patterns. The first one I want to share is called the Bookends cardigan. This one is a top-down raglan sleeved cardigan, and it's worked in this reverse stockinette stitch design with these like 2 strapping colors. But the way the stitch design is chosen, the colors actually kind of blend into each other. They're not hard stripes, and I think that's what makes this cardigan very interesting. There's also like this pretty long rib stitch pattern at the bottom and at the cuff. And yeah, I think it's a very versatile cardigan. I think this might be an item that if you make, you'll wear it a lot. In this video, I didn't really want to include that many stripe patterns because I think stripes are always a little bit easier to kind of like change in a regular pattern. Like if you have a plain stockinette stitch pattern, like adding stripes to that is not the hardest, or I think there's definitely enough tutorials online to be able to do that. But I did want to include this one because of the interesting stitch construction in that like the stripes kind of like blend into each other a little bit, which I think is so pretty. So this one comes in sizes XS through 5XL, and the pattern designer is Meg Rope. And from what I understand is that the button band is added later, so all the details are kind of added at the end. Yeah, I think it's a very beautiful cardigan. Hobbii also has a lot of free patterns that are really worth checking out. They're a little bit more like recent than the ones on the Drops website, which a lot of them are a little bit older, and therefore like kind of in like how modern they are might be a little bit like behind Hobbii, I would say. The second Hobbii pattern that I found that I was actually really impressed by, that it is a free pattern, is the Thelma Pullover. So this is this very intricate circular yoke colorwork sweater that features this, it's almost like a Fair Isle pattern. I don't know if it's a strict Fair Isle, because of course with Fair Isle you're only like the rule or like the definition of Fair Isle I think is that only 2 colors are used at once. So I'm not really sure, I would have to look at the charts if that's the case with this pattern. It might actually not be, I'm not sure. But it is a top-down sweater and it is definitely a Scandinavian inspired pattern. What I really like about this pattern is that it adds short rows at the back, which I think with circular yokes colorwork you often see that that's a little bit forgotten, which creates kind of the sagging like neckline at the back. So with this one they add short rows, which makes me think that it won't drop down that low at the back. Definitely a big plus for me if I were looking for a sweater to make in this colorwork type of pattern. Then the next pattern that really spoke to me from Hobbii are this pair of socks, which are the autumn leaf socks. They look like pretty standard socks. I think it's an afterthought heel from what I can see. They feature this color work at the cuff at the top as well as on the toe at the bottom, and they're just super cute. I think, yeah, if you choose the right colors they can be perfect for autumn or perfect for winter. And yeah, they come in 4 different sizes, which is really nice with socks, and it is a top to toe construction, so you start at the cuff and then you end at the toe. Yeah, with an afterthought heel, like I said. Another website that has some free patterns is the yarn website Lion Brand. They do, well, it seems like they're selling you the whole kit, but you can usually also download the pattern for free. So I found one pattern on there that I really liked in terms of how the color work looks and just like the overall vibe of the pattern, and that is called the Cowl. I think it's just called Cowl, I don't know. It features this beautiful color work of these colorful diamonds that kind of like are interlocking into each other, and the cowl has ribbing at the top and ribbing at the bottom. Now I have knit cowls before, but I do kind of find them a little bit difficult to wear underneath coats, and with this cowl being so large, that's definitely a concern that I would have if I were to cast on this pattern. So something that I would probably do is to decrease the width of it to make it a little bit more narrow in terms of like how wide around me it goes, because this size looks like it can't quite fit around twice. It's also too high to fit around twice. But I still would want to really feature the color work, which is so beautiful, but I would probably just make it a little bit more narrow so that it just kind of fits a little bit better around. So the weight of the yarn used here is worsted weight yarn. The gauge is 16 stitches and 10 centimeters. And the pattern states that this one is knit in Fair Isle color work. And yeah, it's rated as like a beginner pattern, so I think it's always a little bit easier to start with something that's not a sweater if you're venturing into color work, so a cowl like this might just be perfect. The next pattern I want to share is a combination pattern, which is a mitten and hat pattern by Purl Soho. Purl Soho is another wonderful website. They make very like aesthetically pleasing patterns, and some of them are for free, and so is this all Rhodes hat and mittens. I feel like I might have shared this before because I just really like the way these look. I think the color work here looks very clean. I think with the thick stripes of the hat turning into the thin stripes, I think that's such a cool visual that's created in the hat here. The thing is that both of these, so the mittens and the hat, they're both worked flat. So if you're not a fan of that, then maybe stay clear of this. But because they are worked flat, it just gives you a little bit more possibility with what you can do in terms of color work. So yeah, this is a garter stitch pattern. So I think it's a pretty accessible pattern, a pretty quick to knit up pattern as well, because you are just knitting back and forth to create that garter stitch when you're working flat. And I think if you make the whole set, so if you make the mittens and the hat, that could be super cute with the stripes. I think that's so fun. If you're interested, go check out Purl Soho. They have a lot of free patterns. Also just like different accessories, different things there. And now the last pattern that I want to share today is also an older pattern, but I think it's one that could be really fun to knit up. So Vogue Knitting, also, I think it used to be more of a thing. I don't know if they still do a lot of things. I actually have an old magazine, a digital magazine of Vogue Knitting. I don't know why I have that, I just have it. And I found a Fair Isle pullover, that's the name of the pattern, on the Vogue Knitting website. So this is another free pattern, and it features this very cool flower pattern. I will say that on this picture that they feature on the website, I think personally I'm not the biggest fan of the color combination choices that they've made, but that's something that's really easily fixed if you're choosing to cast on this project. The difficulty of this pattern is classified as experienced, so it is a more advanced pattern. It comes in sizes small through 3XL, and it is like worked in this Fair Isle pattern at a gauge of 20 stitches and 20 rows in 10 centimeters. And I don't know, I think it's so fun. I think an all over colorwork pattern is definitely a big undertaking. But I also think that with this pattern, because it is very repetitive, it's also not something that you would need to check the charts for every single row of the pattern. And I think once you're kind of used to the flowers and repeating them, it could go a little bit quicker. I think if I were to knit this sweater, I would choose lighter colors. I would choose probably a light undertone, maybe some pinks and oranges and yellows and purples or something like that, to just give it a little bit more life, and to kind of, yeah, make it a bit more less 70s, 80s, let's put it that way. I think something else that I would change to this pattern is I would make it a little bit more with more positive ease, so that, yeah, it mimics like kind of like an outerwear winter sweater or something like that a little bit more. I should also add that the designer is Melissa Liepman. And yeah, this is posted under the Knitting Vogue website, where they also have a lot of other patterns, but I will say that none of those really stood out to me. But it definitely worth a look. I think they're all a little bit older, these patterns, from what I can see. But they're all like PDF downloadables. Okay, so those are already all the patterns that I wanted to share today. I think it goes to show that with a little bit of like deep diving or a little bit of research, there's definitely a lot of colorwork patterns out there available for free. Now, they might not be like the most fashionable or the most like modern, but I think that's also really okay. At the end of the day, it's about what you want to knit and the time that you want to put into something so intricate. And yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you're interested, to go check out like more of these websites, because they do feature, it's kind of like a hidden gem. A lot of them aren't even like linked to Ravelry, so they're a little bit harder to find sometimes. But especially Hobbii and Drops Garn Studio, they have so many patterns. So if you take the time and like scavenge through a little bit, I'm sure that you'll find something that kind of suits your fancy. Now, this video has definitely motivated me to start some more color work. I did like do color work in the past, but I just haven't really done it in a while. And with this research and with these patterns that I've had saved for a while, I do have like a pretty big itch to start a color work project. So I'm also taking this just as inspiration for myself. So maybe this was also inspiration for yourself. If it was, let me know down below, like what are you knitting? What are you gonna be casting on? What are you inspired by? I would love to hear it. I'm gonna leave the video here for today. So if you liked it, I would love for you to give it a thumbs up. Maybe even subscribe if you want to kind of stick around for the long run a little bit. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next one. And until then, I hope you take care. Bye.